Lisieux lies in the Normandy region in northwestern France, and it's where a terrifying haunting and extreme poltergeist activity took place in the 1980s. An elderly couple lived in a remote house in Lisieux. The terrifying events that were to befall the couple were later witnessed by friends and family, leaving no doubt that something terrifying had ended their life would later become known as the Lisieux Horror. The couple had been living peacefully in the house for 10 years, when all of a sudden, their lives were suddenly turned upside down on a calm Sunday afternoon in autumn. One evening, the couple had settled down to have their dinner, when all of a sudden, they heard a loud knock on the door. The couple were surprised that somebody would be knocking that late in the evening, as the house was nowhere near any village or town, but was in a remote region of Lisieux, and they rarely got unexpected visitors, especially that time of the night. The wife got up from the table to answer the door. When she opened it, there was nothing to be seen, and nobody was in sight. What was even more disturbing was that at the front of the property were large iron gates that would make a loud squeaking noise if anyone opened them. But they never heard a sound, and on inspection found the gates were securely closed. But somebody would have to come through the noisy gates to reach the front door. But the unusual knock on the door was just the beginning, when later that evening, when they were about to get into bed, they heard a loud knocking coming from the attic, and they were certain that someone was now inside their house. They both went upstairs to check for a possible intruder, but on entering the attic, they found it totally empty. Believing it may have been caused by the wind, thought nothing more about it and went back to bed. But the banging and knocking continued and got louder and louder, and Mrs. Dupree started to get distressed. The following day she called her sister-in-law to help comfort her. However, the sister-in-law thought to herself that she probably had an overactive imagination, but nevertheless came over for moral support. When her sister-in-law arrived, Mrs. Dupree broke down in tears and was totally distraught and needed to share her nightmare. The sister-in-law had only been at the house about 15 minutes when she heard what sounded like gravel being thrown at the windows from outside, and claimed that it was terrifying to hear noises yet not know where they were coming from and whatever was doing it, and she stayed with them throughout the night. But next day she refused to stay in the house any longer. Later that day, men in the family decided to come over and stay and find out what was causing the disturbances, and then 2 other brothers and 2 other sisters also joined in the group. That evening, they were all seated around the dining table when the noises began. They walked upstairs to where the noise was coming from and entered one of the bedrooms. To their horror, they could see the wardrobe shaking and rattling about by itself, and even rose off the floor as the contents started to fall out. To stop the wardrobe jumping about, the men decided to completely dismantle it. Believing it would solve the problem, they went back downstairs. However, they started to hear rattling sounds coming from upstairs again. When they went back upstairs to inspect, to their amazement, the dismantled wardrobe continued to jump about. Now everyone was afraid and closed the door to the bedroom. The following day, more members of the family arrived and were also skeptical about the events that were supposedly happening. But what they were to encounter would take the poltergeist activity to a whole new level. In the attic was a crate of apples, which suddenly rose out of the crate and flew through the door and out of the room and down the stairs, terrifying everyone as the apples were in the air and flying around them. One of them managed to grab one of the apples and found it was hot to touch. Everyone who had entered the house decided it was all too much and he decided to leave, including Mr. and Mrs. Dupree, who stayed away for 1 week as they were too frightened to stay any longer. When they later returned, they initially found the house quiet and peaceful, but the next time a sister-in-law came for dinner, strange, unaccountable things started to happen again. The sister-in-law stayed the night, and the following morning, as she was walking down the hallway, saw the ghostly image of a man, who then put his hand on the bedroom door, then promptly vanished in front of her. She was absolutely terrified. It was the first time she'd ever seen a ghost, and up to that moment had never believed in them and had no explanation for what she'd just encountered. For the next 2 months, the elderly couple continued to be haunted by noises coming from all over the house, and psychological counselling and religious blessing of the house failed to curtail their living nightmare. They then contacted a local exorcist by the name of Michelle Moyer. On entering the house, Michel Moyer claimed that he felt strong forces in the house trying to harm him, and said that spirits can be very powerful, very clever, and very strong. Michel Moyer then laid down on one of the beds, whereupon it started moving about and writhing by itself. He said he needed to quell the forces that were inside the bed. Later that day, he performed exorcism rituals in every room of the house. The exorcism seemed to work, as the Dupree couple claimed that from that moment they were never bothered by disturbances in the house ever again.